Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I have a special guest, Jim, and he is based out of Chicago, right, Jim?
I am
Yeah,
Chicago.
and
Right.
he is doing seven figures in commercial construction, and he used to be a young mortgage broker back in the day, but now he is fixing and flipping, buying rentals, and doing commercial renovations. So, welcome to the podcast, Jim. For people that don't know you, can you give us a brief background of your history?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Phil. Thanks for being having me here today and
Yeah.
having me as a guest on your podcast. Looking forward to chatting. My background it basically it's not one of crazy excitement. It's one that
Mhm.
I think that aligns well with other people in the business because I don't come from a place where I grew up with a ton of wealth or anything that's unique to anyone else. So when I tell my story, I feel that it aligns with many other people that are in real estate that want to grow and acquire assets and grow their wealth. My background starts off in construction. As a kid, around a construction site, swinging the hammer around my dad's projects, and that led me to realizing what hard work is at a young age, which I appreciate that even still today. That then turned into more of the financial side. Got into the mortgage business at a young age. That was something where my dad had some, um, he had a little bit of that in him too, where he wanted to understand the financial piece. It wasn't him. We're all different. So he was one that didn't understand how to grow the things and scale the things. And I always looked at that to be something I was trying to figure out. And how do I do that? How do I scale something or grow something? So when I got into the mortgage business, my boss there, he had scaled some offices that I was really impressed by that part of the business. He didn't have as much of the hard work piece, but he was able to scale it with minimal work. So I was able to see, okay, here's hard work and here's scaling. I wonder how I could combine those two together and do something great later on in my life, which is what I'm really focusing on doing right now.
Yeah, that's your background, not to like sound cheesy or anything, but it sounds like a little bit like a Pace's story. You have your dad as a contractor, he had problem scaling, same with Pace's dad, and here you are taking I guess the torch and doing it better than your dad, but after a good foundation was laid, right?
Right on. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so what got you? I know you said you were a mortgage broker at a young age, and then during COVID you had something special happen to you, or like just a crash, basically. I guess not special, but a learning uh, event. Can you kind of go a little bit about that? Like, I know everybody goes through hard times. Like, what was your hard time during that period of time?
Yeah, yeah, that was a unique time. My first hit was back in '08. I was in the mortgage business. I was doing
Hmm.
loans. I seen the ease of acquiring property. If anybody was around the real estate business back then, it was the Wild West. I mean, you could
Yeah,
just throw a loan application at the wall, it'll stick, and
yeah.
you could buy 10 properties with no money down, really, and you can over leverage. You could do whatever you wanted. And when I seen these loan programs available, I'm like, well, why wouldn't I buy some property?
Mm.
So I started acquiring right at the wrong time. So I was seeing these programs start to change. Remember, I was behind my desk. I was working from my home at the time. I had a small apartment, and I was doing loans. I got these email alerts coming through. Like Lehman Brothers is shutting down, and all
No.
these banks are closing. And I had it was maybe like pre-closing, like they were having problems. They weren't officially closed yet, and I started seeing these warning signs. Hey, something's happening here. There's blood in the water. I got to figure out what to do with my real estate assets that I had. And I was still really young. I didn't understand, the impact of what was to come, and probably most people didn't. From there, I started trying to sell off my real estate. I only had a handful of properties, but I bought them at 100% financing.
Oh,
And
okay.
I had no money in. So I was able to offload most of them, but with a pretty significant loss. So the one I remember I purchased for about 330,000, sold for 25 grand.
Oh,
So that was,
wow.
yeah, that was that's
That's a significant loss for sure.
yeah, that's how large of a difference the values were. And I
Jeez.
went to look at those property values just at one of these recent owners club events that we were at.
Hmm.
And I pulled up the address out of curiosity. We're talking, what, 20, how many years later now it is,
Right.
almost 20 years, 15 years now. And the value still has yet to reach that value from back then.
Oh, wow, really?
It's
Dang.
never, yeah, it was never really worth anything at all. It just overinflation and just
Yeah.
the excitement of that market. So
Gotcha.
with that, I ended up getting stuck with one, had to short sale one property, which then hits your credit, and then you start to
Yeah.
come across challenges. Fortunately, that's behind me now, but then
Yeah.
I've learned that, how important credit was then, but now I learned how, really it's not that important with creative finance,
Yeah.
which is quite interesting. I thought I was like, handcuffed back then. So with that '08 hit, that was some really good lessons learned of how the
Hmm.
market, says a lot and dictates a lot. And then fast forward to COVID, in between those years, I went heavier into construction. I
Hmm.
still dabbled in real estate. I still invested here and there really lightly. I feel like I
Sure.
was kind of overly cautious, you could say,
Hmm.
and that was a mistake in my part. From there, I started to see signs from COVID of what could I do here, to maybe give back, to help, and then to maybe make this profitable as a business with things happening in my market of Chicago.
Yeah.
Chicago was heavy in testing. They were big on the whole COVID push, and there was another business I seen opening up. This is an off the wall COVID site, and go, well, maybe I should look at the same.
Hmm.
So a partner and I got together. We opened up a drive-through, and that was a nice, profitable short-term venture that we did give back a lot then too,
Nice.
but did generate. The win-wins are always great, and
Yep.
that's what I see. So similar with our community. It's
Yeah.
giving win-win scenarios to sellers and to people that are trying to get rid of their real estate. But that was another experience of just being around chaos and figuring out how to still tread water and really maybe make progress during times of crisis.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that, and
Yeah.
that's a pretty full scope of your background and history. Now shifting into like what you do now, like what is like the purpose behind what you're doing? Like, what's the besides the monetary aspect and the materialistic aspects? Like, there's got to be a bigger why, and like I just want to know. After all the guests I speak to, I just want to know people's why, just so I can get maybe fuel under my own why or help other somebody else.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a very great question. I appreciate that question a lot
Yeah.
because it makes me think more of, every time I think of that myself, when I'm alone or when I'm talking to people of what I'm doing, why am I waking up early this morning here
Yeah.
to get it going? And if you're, there's something about like this, is your why big enough? Is your why
Yep.
big enough to make everything worth it? And I look at my kids every day and I look at them and I say, that there's not a bigger why than that. It may
Hmm.
sound a little cheesy to some people because it's, everybody hears about similar things, but it's so true. When I see my children and I see a reflection of time passing before me in a
Hmm.
way that I've never really took into, it was never that significant. When I
Yeah.
age, I age. I see my children aging. Well, now I'm truly aging, and I know
Yeah.
that time is even that more valuable. And if I look at, is this worth me leaving my children for today? Is this worth my time to be away from them? So I always
Hmm.
am asking myself those questions. Is this worth it? Is my investment of time here going to generate what truly matters? Am I helping other people? Am I generating a future for my kids? And
Yeah.
it needs to balance out. So my goals right now are much different than they were when I was younger.
Hmm.
And part, as I mentioned, my children, but it's the impact of other people in a positive way
Yeah.
has given me more fulfillment than anything else. And when I'm able to make a positive impact around wherever I'm at, the people around me, the things I'm doing, lifting others up around me, and then also being lifted up by others greater than me and being around those people that have really just made that trail clear before me.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. One day I'll have kids and I'll understand where you're gonna be at, where you're at, basically.
Again, man.
Um, when it comes to, I kind of want to touch on these two different topics that I heard you speak about, the 1031 exchange and then managing like basically nationwide fixing and flipping or like project management in the commercial space. So can you touch briefly about? I know your experience on the 1031 exchange, but if listeners don't know what a 1031 exchange is, can you kind of like briefly walk us through what that is in a high level, like very, very simplistically?
Yeah, I mean, in a very simplistic way, what you're doing is you're just offsetting what taxes are owed by
Hmm.
moving funds from one property to the next property. So it's
Yep.
it's it's the simplest way that I could see it to
Hmm.
be explained. I have a piece of real estate. I want to move the whatever equity is there when I sell it over to the next property. If I don't do that with a 1031, I'm subject to capital gains, and then you have to then pay significant taxes. So there's rules and regulations to that, but I just lean on the professionals to handle and guide me through the process to ensure that, hey, I hear of something. A lot of these things you see on different quick short videos or
Yeah.
reels, and you're like, well, what is this new tax strategy? Is this legit? And I've never seen this one years and years ago, and I knew people that did it and used it, but I'm different where if I do it, I truly understand it. I
Yeah.
could read it, and I think maybe a lot of us, I guess, could be that way where you're doing it, you're understanding it, and you're going through the steps, and then you're going to hit roadblocks and have more questions. But that's really all it is. You're moving off the capital gains to a future date and
Yeah.
potentially never selling the property at all.
So let's say I have an example here. I have like a property that is listed on the market for sale on the MLS or on market, whatever you guys want to call it. And I want to sell it to do a 1031 exchange. What is the order of operation there? Do I wait for the pending offer or do I wait at closing? Like kind of guide me through what you went through.
Yeah, I remember the process was where I have to identify a like property. So I have to go and identify the property. There was a form provided by the 1031 company. It was rather inexpensive. I think it was like around
Yeah.
$1,000 out the door to get the service.
Okay.
And they sent me a form and said, hey, identify the properties that you're looking at. Make sure they're like properties. You have, I think, 45 days or so to replace it, and then you have to buy within 180 days after the closing.
Okay.
So we followed their steps there. There was one unique thing about it in my scenario where I have a business partner on the LLC, and we both had similar but somewhat different ideas of how to proceed with the next purchase.
Okay.
But since it was the LLC that owned and sold that property, that same LLC now has to go buy the next property. So
Yep.
there we had, a little bit of a handcuff situation there where we were restricted. But again, it's now knowing going forward that the process, if you have an LLC with multiple members, keep that in mind when you're
Yeah.
going to go forward with continuing at 1031.
Gotcha. And did you start the process when you put the property on the market, or when you were under contract, or when you sold? Like, where'd you end up starting the process at?
Sure. I started beforehand. I
Okay.
had a conversation with the 1031 company before I even put it on the market to understand what could we
Okay.
do here and what property should we identify later on to purchase. So he's kind of going to get all our ducks in a row because I knew there was
Sure.
some time constraints and I wanted to be prepared.
And let's say you couldn't identify, let's say the properties you did identify initially were no longer available. What were the alternative options that you had?
You could replace the properties. You could swap them out. There is a window for that, but you could swap out properties if they're no longer available, or if you just changed your mind. So you could
Okay.
you could put in. I think it was 3 lines on my form that I
Sure.
put properties on. I only had 2 properties identified, so I had 2 on there. But I didn't have to. I didn't have to do both. I could just do one or swap it out.
And was that an extra cost, or was it basically for free, or was it part of the package?
This was a package. Yeah, they were really
Okay.
easy to work with. They came recommended by my accountant, and
Okay.
so they just said, "Hey, here's a company that we work with," and they worked out pretty well.
And once you sold the property, everything was basically on the 1031 escrow officer. Basically, the funds would go into their holding account, and then from there, you would start the due diligence process or the outreach process to the properties that you identified to see if you can close on that. And then once you guys were to say you guys find a agreements with the buyers and sellers, then your due diligence started, and then the closing date started, and then they would wire funds to the new title company to close. Basically, is what I'm kind of projecting or assuming
Yep,
in my head. Okay.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And then what we did is we also worked with, in this case, we went to a credit union for the next acquisition. We had a
Okay.
relationship with a local one already. So they had some of our assets held at the local credit union for different
Okay.
debts there. And we said, hey, this is the amount of money we believe we will have. We maybe don't have to use all of the money for your program, but we would prefer to put more down in this scenario to utilize all of those funds. That way, we could just put all of it into the property and just get a lower debt amount in this scenario.
Yeah.
Typically, hey, more debt the better for my
Yeah.
current, yeah, right. I mean, give me 100% financing again, and I get crazy. But no, don't do that.
Yeah.
But that was where I was at. I think we had another, I don't know, 30 grand. We didn't
Okay.
have to put down, but
Right.
why pay taxes on that money?
Exactly. So you
Yeah.
actually you borrowed less from the bank to make up for the total purchase price to be able to get a lower monthly payment on your quote unquote mortgage, and then that way you can probably better cash flow. I'm presuming, right?
And it's not have to pay
Yeah.
taxes if I didn't use those
Yeah.
funds. Yeah, then that was my big thing was that. But yeah, then the result is also lower
Yeah.
payment as you mentioned, definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the consequences, I guess, if you were, let's say, you could not identify a property, would those proceeds will obviously go back to you after what? Let's say you identify you were going to go close and you didn't have, I guess, it did stay closed for whatever reason after the 180 days. What happens to your funds at that point? Because there's like no more time left, I'm presuming.
Run out of time, then yeah, that's you lose once the window passes, then you get the funds and you pay whatever, go to your accountant. Hopefully you have some other things to offset that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you better
yeah.
make sure that shit works. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
exactly. Otherwise you bite the bullet on that one and yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. Yep.
Okay, let's kind of switch gears here real quick. I guess I'm really fascinated with like what you do, like personally, like your
Mhm.
business wise. You're managing. You said nationwide renovations, right? Like that's to me that's insane because I'm such like a hands on like kind of control individual. Like I have my process and systems, but like doing it
Yeah.
out of state, fixing and flipping, especially in the commercial space. Like kind of walk me through like how like your systems and processes looks like on like when you're managing from afar.
Yes. Well, I'm in a unique position to be able
Yeah.
to do this based on the way we're structured as a construction business already. So
Okay.
I didn't start fix and flips and then go do renovations all over the place. I was doing construction in other states first. So
Mm-hmm.
we do commercial construction, we travel, and we'll typically contract on larger new developments as a prime
Okay.
sub, handling different scopes of work. So we start building a team in a market on seven-figure contracts. And with those resources there, now we identify in that market, or that's how it started. We
Yeah.
identify other opportunities in that market. And now I'm scaling down to do small residential things, which is more
Mm-hmm.
like side work for the people on site, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it just kind of made sense. So over years of doing that, I started looking at those opportunities. And then fast forward to being involved in communities such as Sub 2, I started
Yeah.
to connect the dots and say, hey, well, I could do the same thing in any major metro because I'm familiar with sourcing labor, contracting it properly. I just need one person for a trusted set of eyes and ears for boots on the ground,
Yeah.
even if they don't know construction really. I mean, if they do, great. But if they don't, at least they can be there and be a body present just to make sure
Mm-hmm.
people are there on site. And it all comes down to the contracts that are set that hold people accountable. And
Right.
we don't allow people to get on top of us. I just carry over to things that we do under commercial jobs. So that's how we learned how to do it, and that's how we do it now. Now there's a cap to this, right? Like I mean,
Yeah.
for me there is right now, and there always will be until I scale further. But there's only so many of these and so many markets that I'm comfortable doing at one time
Mm-hmm.
until I continue to add more like staff and management. So right now we can handle a handful of markets at one time, but the goal is to not spread out everywhere. It's to stay in those markets and just grow in those markets. So
Mm-hmm.
when I start to say we can go anywhere, it's because we're not filled yet, right?
Yeah.
We don't have our capacity full. So we're looking at really prime markets of growth. Really, where most investors are looking right now into states that are landlord friendly, that have population density growth. You
Mm-hmm.
see more developments happening, and that's where we want to do more of our fix and flips or fix and holds.
And you're based out of Chicago, so I'm assuming you're probably most of your projects are in the Sun Belt states, presumably.
Well, yes, as far as
Yeah.
where we're focusing for
Yeah.
our fix and flips, but our
Mm-hmm.
construction is primarily right now. Most of it's happening in Montana, in Bozeman.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah. We
Okay.
actually opened up a second office in Bozeman. That happened. We started working out there a few years ago, and just that growth there, it just
Yeah.
spinned off into a need for me to have another home base there in Bozeman,
Okay.
another branch of the company.
Gotcha. I have a question in regards to how do you get boots on the ground? Do you throw ads out there? Do you connect with the sub two community? Like how do you go about doing that? And kind of what's your vetting process with the actual individual? Because you said they don't have to have, construction experience, but it'd be better if they did. So like, what's your
Sure.
delineation and process like that?
Sure. Yeah, so prior to Sub 2, I wasn't open to any market. I was
Uh-huh.
more so focused on markets that I had already some projects happening, or I was already, where I had worked at before at some point in the past. So if I had worked in
Sure.
Huntsville, Alabama, Nashville,
Uh-huh.
Tennessee, different parts of the country, I would say, okay, I have some experience there now. I've visited those areas. I'm comfortable. I will
Mhm.
now do rehabs there, which then it kind of aligns with most of us will do. People will move, but then I'll hear they're still doing rehabs where they used to live because they
Mhm.
have their relationships. But when I tied Sub 2 into the equation, that
Mhm.
changed everything. What happened now, I have trusted partners to be in really any part of the country, right? I mean, you look around and there's community everywhere.
Yeah.
That's what made this whole connection happen and made this possible to be able to do the fix and flips anywhere is because now I utilize the skills and tools, which I'll go to in a minute, of how to source the
Yeah.
labor, and then having somebody that we could be a trusted person. So when I do go out to a new market and I'm looking for labor, the good thing is I have a wide network already within my construction, my Rolodex of construction contacts. So I'll
Mhm.
reach out to them first and say, hey, what projects have we done or what have you done in this market in the past couple of years? And I'll start getting some contacts and phone numbers of the larger commercial companies that we have access to. And that will then tend to refer either some of their workers or some of their smaller companies.
I see.
That's why step one. And then step two is one that anybody could do is calling the local building suppliers.
Okay.
That's such a huge way to locate quality subcontractors. A roofing supplier, will give you who are their best roofers, right?
Yeah.
That'll be one of the best ways to do so. Then it goes to the next step of, well, do you understand the proper questions to ask? Which then that
Right.
is, could be a challenge for some. So that will be where the experience comes into play, or hopefully your partner, if you don't have it, just bring your partner in and they could fill that gap as long as they've done some rehabs. They'll know some of those questions to ask. And nowadays with Zoom and with video calls,
Yeah.
most of the guys that I talk to, or people I talk to, they're on their phone. They're not behind a desk because
Mhm.
they're out in the field. So we'll do a quick little phone video chat, just get to know each other a little bit. But then when you plug in that accountability factor, most
Yeah.
of the accountability in my experience is the subs knowing that somebody's around. That's
Mhm.
a lot of it is just if they're by themselves on this property day after day, things go sideways. You find
Yeah.
beer cans in the corner, you find, all this trash in the yard because there's no one to supervise them. It's just a
Yeah.
crazy thing, but that's what happens on every job. In fact, I just had a call a few days ago. I have a local project I'm doing for one of these bank loans, a 2 or 3K loan, and they haven't been there for a couple weeks. It's something I'm helping out the bank get this rehab done, and it's easy. It's an easy job. It's maybe like $100,000 job. It's super easy, quick remodel, and I haven't gone there. But I get a phone
Mm.
call a couple days ago from the homeowner who I've spoke to maybe twice because I'm
Okay.
working with the bank, and they said, "Hey, there's trash blowing around in the yard. They're not bagging up the things. My neighbors are complaining." Turns
Yeah.
out that the guys were just not tying up the bags of garbage. Like such a simple
Uh,
thing, and it's
yeah.
blowing around. And if someone was present, I mean, who wouldn't notice that, right? So the
Right.
things that are going to go wrong are typically noticed from people that could just be around that you trust that are
Yeah.
making sure they're paying attention to detail. So the detail piece is important. Now, as
Mhm.
far as construction experience goes, the more the better. But what I do is I get video and photos of what's happening,
Yep.
and I review those before anything's released. And a lot of banks and lenders do the same thing.
Mhm.
They say, send me photos, upload them. I'll release your next draw. And as long
Yeah.
as you know what you're looking at, you should be in pretty good shape.
I see.
Yeah.
And for those that are not experienced, like what kind of questions do you normally ask? Because, you can get a partner involved. Let's say you don't have any partners, but you can also get educated too as well, like really
True.
understand it, to basically say what you understand and basically say like, hey, I understand X, Y, and Z. Can you help me with how to ask questions to a potential contractor? Like, what's your questions like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a couple things. So I'm big on keeping the rehabs pretty quick and easy, which
Mm-hmm.
means the only walls I'm trying to open up, unless I'm going to literally open up a room,
Yeah.
is the bathroom walls for the tub surround. Otherwise, I'm trying not to open up walls anywhere
Mm-hmm.
if I don't have to. And when you don't open up walls, you're not going to find too many surprises typically.
Yeah.
So what'll happen is, what are the things I'm going to hire out? Well, I'm going to be hiring out potential roof, as I mentioned. You're going
Mm-hmm.
to have tile, you're going to have plumbing, you have general things. So
Mm-hmm.
in each trade, there's whoever you're hiring, and I tend to not hire local GCs. I tend to just
Mm-hmm.
hire out each sub, and then I
Yep.
can ask each sub directly some specific questions. And I may throw in a trick question every now and then. I've known to do that.
Yeah.
For example, like if I'm going to have someone redo the bathroom, I'll say, "Are you guys going to use half inch or 5/8 drywall in the tub surround?" Well, I don't want them to use drywall at all.
Right.
So that'll be something I'm asking them for, at least the tub surround. I'm going to want them to use cement board for that. But
Yep.
then that one there doesn't disqualify them. I just want to understand more about them. And then I'll say, what do you use for waterproofing and what product do you use? More
Mm-hmm.
of a curiosity way of doing it more than I'm really not going to be grilling them under a light. It's just a friendly conversation because
Sure.
sometimes they don't know and I'm okay with it. And other times, if they don't know, I'm not okay with it if it's too really, really bad. And then
Yeah.
other times they just make up a lie. And then, you can't trust them. And, you could tell they're just trying to give you an answer and they don't have no idea what's happening. So those are ways that I typically go through those conversations, and they're really quick and easy. I mean, I've gotten them down pretty well, where a few minutes on the phone, and then you kind of get a feeling whether or not you want to work with them, A, and then B, if they know what they're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Those are
Yeah,
definitely good points.
yeah.
I know there's always delays on projects. How do you manage delays? And do you
Mhm.
tie those delays to like a payment schedule of some sort?
Yes, exactly. So we use what's called AIA documentation. So
Okay.
that documentation is formal documentation that's used in the construction industry, and
Mm-hmm.
there's certain pages of that document that you would go to, which would be schedules, a schedule of value. There's a pay request schedule, and this is going to identify what the total contract value is, and it's
Mm-hmm.
going to break out each area of work being performed by that subcontractor. It'll show you a total value for each area. And then
Mm-hmm.
what we do is we require that to be completed and filled out, submitted before payment is issued. And on there, it'll show you percentage of work done for each area. If anyone's
Mm-hmm.
ever been involved in a 2 or 3K loan or any construction loan at all from any bank, it's the very, very similar process.
I see.
They're going to require to know how much percentage of completion is done. Now, you're not going to have as many subs that will work for you in this
Yeah.
scenario. You're going
Mm-hmm.
to have less. So that's one consideration because A, they don't want to do it, they don't understand it, and a lot of
Yeah.
them want deposits.
Yep.
And unfortunately, you really can't give a deposit if you're going to be
Mm-hmm.
covered, like 100% covered. There's no way to do it. But what you can do is find ways to offer to pay for the materials up front, and you could
Yep.
pay for that yourself. So if you again, this goes back to how much do they want to work with you in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
In some circumstances, you're in a jam, you got to make a deposit, you have to weigh those options, and you have a contract signed. You go ahead and you do it. But the more you work with people, the more easy it will get in that area.
Yeah.
But that's what's going to happen. And with those documents, you're also going to get a partial lien waiver signed on
Okay.
every
Yep.
payment request. So every time there's a 5K paid out, it's going to say conditional lien waiver. This lien waiver is conditional upon receipt of payment. Once payment's received, that's pre-signed document. Now you know that everything's even. And then later on, you can always get a final lien waiver when the project is
Yeah.
done.
That's a pretty good process. I don't add lien waivers or conditional lien waivers after every payment. I normally do it at the very end of the project,
Sure.
just to say like all payments were paid on this project, and you can't put a
Yes.
lien on the property. So we're coming up on the 30-minute mark, Jim. I give the guests here like, do you have any requests, any asks of like, if someone's watching this, like they could maybe add value to your life since you've already added so much value to the listeners and myself. Any requests that you have pending?
I appreciate that. Well,
Yeah.
first off, you can always follow me on my social sites, which is Jim Vani Builds. So it's my
Yep.
name with Builds on Instagram and Facebook. You can follow me there and always follow along with what I'm doing in my real estate and construction career. As far as what people could do, if you're interested to learn more about doing a rehab in a different market, if there's an investment you're looking at in real estate, anything with value add, and you have questions, feel free to reach out on those platforms. I'd be happy to help out, potentially even partner with certain individuals as well.
Awesome, man.
Yeah, yeah, man.
So any final words before I let you go, Jim?
I would always say that before you do a rehab, just know that there's checks and balances in place. I get calls on a frequent basis, unfortunately, where people they lent out money or they got involved in a deal and they are just totally at a big loss after
Yeah.
not really understanding the full process. So I'd really highly suggest partner up with somebody as long as you have some relationship. If you're in sub two, if you're not,
Yeah.
join sub two. I'm sure Phil will have a
Yeah.
link here for you for that.
It's gonna
But
be in the link. Yep.
yeah, but join sub two if you're not in it because that's going to give you a stamp of approval and people that want to uphold their reputation in a community of people that are go givers. And with that, you're going to have an opportunity to partner with people who will help you and they'll have your back. And that'll
Yeah.
give you a way to get into real estate and look at rehabbing property if that's what you're looking at doing in a more protected manner.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so
And
much, Jim, for jumping on the show. I really do appreciate your time, and I'll talk to you later, brother.
Phil, thanks for having me today. Appreciate
All
it.
right. Peace, guys.